All right, so I've played a little further into the game than here, but this is when you first get control of the camera. This is Hogwarts Legacy. We're on an RTX 4090, and I currently have all the settings maxed out, including ray tracing. This is 4K. It's the very beginning of the game, so there shouldn't be too many spoilers here for any of you, any of that. If you're like, wait, doesn't the game not come out for 3 days? If you buy the deluxe edition of the game, one of the perks is one of the 3-day early access things. Now, I'm not necessarily saying you should all do that. In general, the longer you wait to buy a game, the less it costs and the more patches have been applied. So, but as a channel to test out the performance, it makes sense for me to get it out to you guys as soon as available. And as you can see here, we are not getting 60 frames per second. We're right around 40 FPS. You can see all the stats in the top left corner. Now, one thing that's nice here is the frame time graph is fairly smooth. And this game did start with shader compilations. If you're familiar with Unreal Engine 4 games, you know that a lot of times they're known as stuttery messes due to shader compilation. Now, I'm not promising this game will be perfect in that regard, but I am telling you that the game at least did begin with a shader compilation step. Now, I'm also not saying that this is the most demanding area of the game or anything like that, but now that I have control, I should actually show you the graphics menus. Now, in terms of the PC port, I'll say that now I'm playing this game with a controller. A third-person RPG is the kind of game that I'll play with a controller. You can see here we're at 4K, all of that. I can go up and down between these menu settings with the D-pad, but one thing that's annoying is when I'm actually navigating this side of the screen, I have to, I can use the right stick to scroll up and down, but then you have kind of a simulated mouse control with the left stick. Now, I'll switch to using an actual mouse to actually navigate these settings because I wish I could just go up and down between menu settings with the D-pad, so it's kind of feels a little bit weird. That's all I'll say with that. Now, right now, I have the low latency reflex on, but I've turned off the frame rate cap, and I've turned off well, you know what? I've turned off motion blur because I know a lot of people don't like that, especially when looking at things like DLSS, everything. And we've turned off upscaling. Now, this does feature DLSS 2 and 3, along with spatial upscalers like FSR 1.0 and NIS. Intel XeSS is here. We also have AMD's FSR 2. So we have the full suite of upscaling tech, and we will absolutely be testing that out in a second. But first, the game does recommend you graphics settings based on a quick scan of your hardware. The benchmark isn't like an actual game benchmark. It just like scans your hardware and recommends some settings. It recommended everything at Ultra, but it did not turn on ray tracing automatically. I turned it on. You also have various ray tracing settings. I went ahead and just maxed everything out, and it does require a reset to apply ray tracing to the game. So when I turn ray tracing off, I will probably have to restart the game as well. So as you can see, this is native 4K, maximum settings, including ray tracing. And you can see that we are in the, 40 to 50 FPS range overall.
How far did that portkey take us?
Now, enabling DLSS would be a good way to solve this problem. So as soon as I can't access my menu while they're talking here, apparently. So as soon as they're done talking, we'll try kicking on some DLSS, see what that does to the image quality and to the performance, and we'll also try out DLSS 3 as well. When we check out DLSS 3, we'll want to open up the NVIDIA overlay, which allows us to look at PC latency, because DLSS 3, while it increases frame rate, it does not help the latency, the responsiveness of the game. So that's going to be something that we'll want to monitor there. You know what? Maybe we'll just leave this open for your benefit. We've got control back, so now we can go ahead and do some comparisons, running up and down here with some various options. So let's go ahead and, like I said, I was trying to use my D-pad to control that, and it was awkwardly not going up and down here. It was going up and down over here. Anyway, we'll click on DLSS. It defaults to an auto setting, but we can go with DLSS Quality. So that actually, it shows you what that's doing. So it's lowering the rendering resolution of the game to about 1440p, and then upscaling to look like 4K using the DLSS machine learning trained algorithm. Obviously, you need a RTX 2000, 3000, or 4000 series card to use this. Now, there's also frame generation, which I could turn on and off separately. However, one thing I've noticed in this game is with DLSS off, all right, there we go. Actually, okay, so as long as you pick DLSS here, if you don't say any DLSS at all, you can't turn on frame generation. If you turn DLSS on, you could then actually set it to off, but then turn on frame generation independently of the DLSS upscaling, DLSS 2. Because frame generation is a whole different thing. We'll talk about that in a bit. So for now, we'll use the actual normal DLSS 2 quality and see where that gets us frame rate wise. You can see already that that's actually enough to get us up into the 80, 90, even 100 FPS range, depending on what we're looking at. By the way, if you see any screen tearing, I'm capturing this on an external capture card at 4K 60 FPS. So that means that I'm not using G-Sync to sync the image, or vsync, but for that matter, to sync the image to the capture, because then that would limit the frame rate. And capture cards don't play well with variable refresh rate. At least mine doesn't at 4K. Gets a little complicated. But anyway, we can see that you can basically max out the game, including maxing out the ray tracing at 4K, as long as you're willing to use DLSS quality. You can see also that the PC latency has gotten better. The milliseconds have decreased using DLSS 2, DLSS Super Resolution. So DLSS Super Resolution increases frame rate by decreasing the rendering resolution, and that means you get more actual real frames, which then decreases the latency, because the game can respond to your inputs quicker. When we compare it to DLSS 3, that's going to matter. But let's get some magic effects on the screen here and see what happens. This is reflective, although it doesn't seem like the ray tracing is actually reflecting the characters into it. Right, so frame rate took a little bit of a hit with the magic effects on the screen. You can see on the frame time graph that there was a few little spikes there. All right, it's talking to us about targeting, all of that. And we can now shoot pots. So there's that. But you can see with DLSS 2, overall frame rate seems pretty good still. Nothing too stuttery or anything like that. All right, so what I want to look at next is using DLSS Frame Generation. So frame generation, like I said, you can toggle independently. So as long as you use set upscale type to DLSS, you can still turn DLSS actual upscaling off. So this will keep the render resolution at a native 4K. But then we can turn frame generation on. You could also upscale, and we'll test that out too. But what this does is this actually delays showing you a real frame to give you an AI, well, a fake frame inserted between two actual game engine generated frames, which will greatly increase the frame rate. But I've noticed some image quality issues with it. Let's go ahead and back out. It's not too bad, but then there's also the average PC latency. So if you look at the top right-hand corner now, you see the average PC latency is now a little over 50 milliseconds. It's not bad, and playing on a controller feels totally fine. But I did want to show you the difference between using DLSS 2 quality and DLSS 3 frame generation. I'm getting a similar frame rate overall, but the latency is better using DLSS 2 because it gets you more real frames. They're just not native 4K. This gets you actual native 4K frames with generated frames in between. Generally, the higher your base frame rate, the better DLSS 3 looks and feels. Now, one thing I'll say, and I don't know how well this will pick up on camera, but I noticed with frame generation activated, scrolling up and down through the menus, as the words go, I don't think this will pick up at 60 FPS very well in the video, but it looks a little like garbled as I move quickly through the menus due to the generated frames in between. In actual gameplay, I've got to say the frame generated frames look reasonable, but then the real magic of frame generation is that it stacks with normal DLSS. So by enabling DLSS quality, we're now rendering the game at 1440p, and then that's going to get us more real frames and better PC latency. And then it upscales a almost 4K-like image. There can be some image quality downsides to it, depending on the game. And then with frame generation active, it's now going to, in between those real frames, give us an upscaled frame, which will greatly increase the frame rate, but again, with a slight hit to the PC latency. But with these two things combined, you can see the PC latency is kind of in the mid-30s in this scene, and the overall frame rate is now over 120 frames per second. Now, one thing to note with that is you might go beyond your monitor's display range, and even if you have G-Sync available, if you go beyond your monitor's maximum frame rate, you might start having some screen tearing. But if you, and usually, let me check this game, but so far every game I've seen with DLSS 3 frame generation available disables vsync in the menus when you have frame generation enabled. Yeah, it grays it out in the menu. So there's some issues with vsync, but if you enable it through your NVIDIA control panel, you usually can still enable vsync to some level of effectiveness. You can also try using a frame rate limiter through the control panel, but you want to set it to half of what you normally would. So normally on my 4K 120 monitor, I would set like 116 frame rate cap to avoid going over my monitor's refresh rate and getting screen tearing. I would set it to 58 in the control panel if I wanted that same effect. However, I'm not frame capping in this video because I don't want to artificially limit the performance of the GPU here. I want us to see the maximum frames. Just be aware that we could control the screen tearing if we needed to. Overall, I played a bit further in the game using these settings, and honestly, I felt like it looked pretty good. DLSS quality plus DLSS 3 frame generation. DLSS quality helping reduce the latency with, like I said, some minor image quality trade-offs. And then DLSS 3 helping further boost the motion fluidity, giving you kind of, fake frames in between real frames. And just keep in mind that a YouTube video can't show you what this is actually like because the YouTube video is capturing at 60 FPS and can't actually display all the frames that I'm seeing. Let's do a little magic effect here, and then I'm going to restart the game with ray tracing disabled so that we can compare this to RT off. But he's going to raise this bridge with his reparo effect. If only magic were that easy, right? I want to repair something. Let's just say reparo. All right, let's restart the game with ray tracing off. But let me go ahead and show you the menus, just to be clear. We are doing what we say we're doing. So 4K, 100% render resolution, just normal TAA anti-aliasing, upscaling is off, and everything else same way we had it. Graphics settings is, again, what the game recommended, which was ultra settings, but this time ray tracing is turned off, and I did restart the game to be sure that those settings actually applied. Now, I don't feel like we need to do a whole heck of a lot here, other than say, it looks like with ray tracing off, you can just max the game out at native 4K. And once again here with a little bit of a cutscene, we can get a side-by-side image for performance and image quality. I think I will take the time to edit it in here. So like I said, I'm filming the voiceover live, I've got to say. Still looks pretty good. Maybe in the edited side-by-side image, you'll see some more dramatic differences between ray tracing on and off. Here, seeing them not side-by-side, I've got to say, it seems about like how I remembered it. Now maybe you guys are laughing at me and saying it looks dramatically different when you see the side-by-side. Well, good for you. Maybe I'll edit in some notes during editing. All right. So we've got camera control again, and I will mention that just because we have RT off doesn't mean that we couldn't use DLSS if we wanted to. So we could go ahead into the, sorry guys, okay, this menu's annoying me that I can't use my D-pad. Like I said, I like to play games like this with a controller, but the menu feels really awkward to navigate with a controller. Okay, let's go ahead and go here, and just for the heck of it, let's turn DLSS to the quality mode with ray tracing off, just to see what kind of frame rate we can push. With this, frame generation is still off at this point. So if we wanted to keep everything at Ultra, but render the game at 1440p upscaled with DLSS quality, we can now see we can reach well over 120 FPS, at least in this scene. I'm sure there are more demanding areas of the game. But if you want to get this video in a timely manner, then you need to just deal with the beginning area of the game, because I don't have time to play the game for hours before finding a different benchmarking spot. All right, frame generation on with DLSS quality, with ray tracing off. Looks like we're now able to push up over 160, 170 frames per second.
Yes, a powerful magic wielded by a rare few that seems to have been.
Seems like if you're going to use this tech though, you might as well have turned on the ray tracing if you're already going to be using DLSS and frame generation. I think the main advantage to having ray tracing off would just be that you don't need to use any of this upscaling tech, and you could just play the game completely native. Now, just for fun, let's try out DLSS off, upscaling wise, but we're going to leave frame generation on. So this will now be native 4K frames with generated frames in between. And we can go ahead and say that since we're starting with a higher base frame rate than we were with ray tracing enabled, this is kind of an interesting way to get a native 4K image, like I said, with those generated frames in between. High frame rate, and if you look at the average PC latency, we're just in like the mid-30s or so. It feels very good on the controller. I'm switching to my mouse here. Still feels very responsive, because the responsiveness of the frame generation really depends on how high the base frame rate is. Also, the higher the base frame rate, the more real frames you have, and the less time each generated frame is on screen. And also the less difference between every 2 real frames for the generated frames to try to make up for. So generally, frame generation is at its best the higher the base frame rate was before using it. So anyway, I think this is enough testing out the 4090. We can tell it does well. If you want to max out ray tracing, though, you should probably use some form of DLSS. And I think a lot of you would be more interested in how do older GPUs handle this game. So currently I'm kind of planning testing out the 1060, 2060, and 3060, possibly all in one long video, where we test out like multiple generations of mid-tier GPUs. I don't know if that's what I'll end up doing. Let me know what you think in the comments section. And if these videos seem to get a lot of interest, that'll mean I can keep doing more videos. If they're not getting a lot of interest, I might still do the videos, but just put them on the members feed. I do sometimes have some extra videos just for channel members. If they're not the kind of thing that's doing well in the YouTube algorithm, but that people might still be interested to see. And huge thank you to channel members, by the way. And I hope all of you have an excellent day. I'm gonna edit this thing and then start testing out some less expensive graphics cards.